How's it going, everyone? This is the George here, and today we are finally concluding the Hunger Games review series with Hunger Games Mockingjay Parts 1 and 2. I'm going to be doing two parts in one video because honestly, this should have just been one movie. The Mockingjay book is around the same length as the Catching Fire book, and that movie was around 2 hours and 30 minutes, I'm pretty sure. So I have no idea why this movie was split into two parts, other than the fact that they probably wanted money because it was a great financial benefit for Warner Brothers when Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows split into two parts. But you can also make the case that it made sense for Harry Potter because Deathly Hallows is a big book and there's a lot of information and characters that you had to figure out how to handle. So that made a lot more sense at the time. But anyways, when it comes to these Mockingjay movies, they're both directed by Francis Lawrence, and once again stars Jennifer Lawrence, Josh Hutcherson, Liam Hemsworth, Woody Harrelson, as well as some newcomers like Julianne Moore. And these movies were also the last two movies that Philip Seymour Hoffman did. So, as far as the Mockingjay plot goes, after the events of Catching Fire, Katniss was rescued by the rebellion and brought to District 13. She found out District 12 has been destroyed. Peeta's been kidnapped by the Capitol and being held there. And she now has to be the Mockingjay and shoot a lot of propaganda for President Coin, who is a very suspicious rebellion leader with her own motivations and her own desires, I guess you can say. And then part two is basically them going to the Capitol to stop President Snow. So, are these movies bad? No. They're well-made movies. They're well-acted. Jennifer Lawrence is still incredible as Katniss. Josh Hutcherson does very well portraying a different side of Peeta, a hijacked version of Peeta that sees Katniss as the enemy. And I think he does a very good job doing that. Liam Hemsworth gets more screen time in these movies as Gale, and I think he does pretty good. Julianne Moore is also a very good addition as President Coin. She portrays who is considered the secondary villain in these Mockingjay movies, in my opinion, very well. Mahershala Ali is also a great addition as well. He's in these movies. Donald Sutherland is still very cunning and menacing as the main antagonist, Snow. All the cast members do very well. No one's miscasted in these movies. The action is still very good. And while I'm not the biggest fan of the Mockingjay plot from the book, I think they do a pretty good job with the plot. The problem is that in order to justify making this book into two parts, there are a lot of scenes that just drag on. There are a lot of things that the pacing just feels slow. Things just drag on, particularly in Mockingjay Part 1. Mockingjay Part 1 is focused on showing propaganda, filming propaganda. There's really only one action sequence when Katniss and her filming team go to District 8. And we've seen this scene many times in the trailers, I remember. Yeah, it's a cool action sequence, but there's just some moments that it just feels like they're just very slow building up to justify making this movie around 2 hours. And while and it's not boring because of the tone. I mean, look, the Hunger Games movies always have a serious tone, and I love the serious tone. It's the same tone that we see in the first two movies, essentially, and what we will later see in the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. It's more so the fact that there's just these meetings are just going on. They feel like they're dragging on longer. These discussions are dragging on longer. This is the least actiony of the Hunger Games movies and probably the least interesting. It's part two where things pick up. Now, I will say, in regards to Mockingjay Part 1, I did like that they added Effie into the mix because she's really not in the book all that much. And I think they did a very good job of fitting her into Mockingjay Part 1. And I think if there was a justification to make this into two parts, I think where they ended, where Peeta is saved, but he's hijacked and he sees Katniss as the enemy and tries to strangle Katniss. I think that's a good cliffhanger to end on if there was a justification to making Mockingjay into two parts. Mockingjay Part 2 is more action-packed. The pacing starts off slow, and I'm thinking to myself, oh boy, here we go again, slow pacing. But once they get to the Capitol, actually, it's like right around the time Finnick and Annie get married. That's when the movie picks up for me. And then we get into the Capitol where Katniss is heading to kill President Snow. A lot of things are happening. These mutated mutts are attacking them in the sewers. and it looks really cool. I know people compare it to Alien and Aliens, but it almost reminds me, and I played The Last of Us a year after Mockingjay Part 2 came out. It almost reminded me of sequences from The Last of Us. But it's really cool. Action in the sewers. Very dark movie, very somber tone. Because essentially, this is also the movie where Prim does get killed. And at first, we think it's President Snow, but we start seeing not all is right, particularly with President Coin. That's why I think she's a great secondary antagonist. And it kind of shows the lesser of two evils thing that we always hear about in regards to picking political leaders or people that are running for some kind of political office. Because Coin is essentially actually the definition of a lesser of two evil. Maybe not. Maybe she's a greater evil than Snow because after Katniss finds out that it was actually Coin that set those bombs off that killed Prim and other children, apparently Coin is very wishy-washy of holding an election, saying, "Oh, I'm gonna be the president. We're gonna have to wait to hold elections when everyone's mindset is all better. Let's have another Hunger Games, but with capital children to show that we mean business." So essentially, the Hunger Games are still gonna be there if she's president, but it's gonna be with capital children. And I like that they did capture like how brutal this war is for the people of the capital because children are getting involved. Children are being the victims, and we're reminded that it's technically President Snow, his allies, and his peacekeepers that are the enemies. There are still some people in the capital that didn't really do anything wrong that are just getting into the mix of stuff. And is it really fair to put other children through what the capital put kids from the districts through? And I remember when I first read Mockingjay, I was not a big fan of what Katniss's decision was when she went to kill Coin. But now that like I've read it a lot better, I've watched these movies a few times and read the book many times. There's a really I think it just fits so well because technically Coin is the one that killed Prim. So it's like she's also kind of avenging Prim as well as preventing this cycle from continuing because essentially that's what it is. It's going to be an endless cycle. But then it does that thing where it tries to do a Return of the Kings, a several different endings thing, which I don't think was needed. But I think it ended in a satisfying note. I will say there's one moment in Mockingjay Part 2 that does not get me emotional, but it does kind of hurt. And that's when Haymitch is reading the letter from Plutarch Heavensby, the character that Philip Seymour Hoffman plays. And if you recall, during the filming of these Mockingjay movies, Philip Seymour Hoffman passed away in 2014. And these are, as I said earlier in the review, these were his last performances. And there's this letter that he gives to Katniss. And it's just, even though it's not narrated by Philip Seymour Hoffman, it's just a reminder that this is essentially the last we're going to hear from his character. And also, we're reminded that we have lost a great talent forever because he unfortunately did pass away. He gives a great performance in these movies. I will say though, the action sequences, the intensity in the capital is also captured very well, and that's where the quick pace comes back because the first two Hunger Games movies were very quick paced. Well, not quick paced, but very well paced. And we get back to that in Mockingjay Part 2 once we get to the capital. But it feels like the beginning and end, the pacing just slows down. And I feel like they're doing that to justify making this book into two parts. So, overall, with these Hunger Game movies, so Mockingjay Part 1, not a bad movie, great performances, a cool action sequence. There's some interesting dialogue and discussions, but then there's some that just feel like they drag on longer than they should. Um, Pacing, this is the slowest pace of the Hunger Games movies. This should have just probably, this is the film that to me should have just probably been thrown in like the first hour or so or hour and a half into Mockingjay. I don't know why they could have just done the risk and made Mockingjay 2 hours and 40 minutes or just gone with a 3 hour Mockingjay movie if they were worried about so much happening. Mockingjay Part 2 starts off pretty slow. picks it up at a certain point. The pacing is very good until Katniss goes back to District 12. And yeah, the ending did put a smile on my face because Peeta has been cured of being hijacked. Him and Katniss finally get together. They have their happy ending where they have kids. And that's the main Hunger Games series. So my overall score for these movies, so Mockingjay Part 1, I'm going to give a B minus because it's still a well-made movie. The propaganda stuff is interesting at first, but then drags on after a bit. But the acting is really good, and that action sequence in District 8 is really good. Mockingjay Part 2, I'm always torn between a B plus and a B for this because this is a very emotional movie, and the action is really good. But the pacing at the beginning and last 10 to 20 minutes slows down. So I'm going to give Mockingjay Part 2 a B. And as far as ranking the Hunger Games movies go, Catching Fire is still my favorite. The first Hunger Games Battle of Songbirds and Snakes, Mockingjay Part 2, and Mockingjay Part 1. But yeah, those are my thoughts on the Hunger Games movies and on both these movies. I know this wasn't as long of a review as people thought, but there's really not a whole lot to dissect with these Mockingjay movies. Just the fact that they should have just been one movie overall, and the reasons why. But yeah, those are my thoughts on both parts of Mockingjay. And I'm glad I got to review these Hunger Game movies and revisit them because these were some of my favorite movies growing up as a teenager. And I still enjoy these movies a lot today. And I had a blast with Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Now, what are your thoughts on the Mockingjay movies? Did you love them? Did you hate them? Do you think they should have just been one movie? Let me know in the comments down below. And what's also your least favorite Hunger Games movie? You can also tell me in the comments down below. And I want to thank you guys for watching. Please like and subscribe already. If you haven't, please share this with someone that likes the Hunger Games movies and books. And I hope to see you guys real soon. Take care, everyone.